Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Bommel in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's play D4 against Bommel. So his peak rating was 1912, achieved on April 7th. So he's played quite a few games in the pool, 2,400 games. Plays C4, and we're going to get a Queen's Gambit declined. I'll play the exchange variation, as I inevitably do. I've thought about playing other lines before, like knight f3 on move 4, but this is the principal way to take advantage of black's move order with knight f6 on move 3 rather than bishop e7, so wait, best take advantage of that. I'll play e3. Knight takes d5 looks like it wins a pawn to the uninitiated, but he could have played knight takes d5, queen takes d8, bishop b4 check, winning the material back with interest. So you don't want to fall for that trap. He'll probably castle now, and I will play queen c2 if he does that. He hasn't committed his c-pawn yet, so he could play theoretically either c6 or c5, or maybe even not move his c-pawn at all and play b6, bishop b7. So I would expect him to play c6. That's what most players do, either before or after castling. But there are some players who like to play c5 instead. It's not that bad of a line for black to play c5. The thing about c5 is black often has to be ready to play with an isolated pawn on d5, because inevitably there will be a trade of the d for c pawn. Well, not inevitably, but if white does not, then black might advance c4. So, okay, so he plays c6, and I have a choice, typical choice, knight ge2 or knight f3 in this position. Knight ge2 is connected to the well-known plan of playing f3 and e4 in the center. I'm going to play knight f3 just because I have a lot of games with knight ge2, and this plan is also pretty interesting, just going knight f3 and playing for traditionally a minority attack on queenside. So let's see how we fare this time around. So knight e4, he's seeking trades with that move. Does that move drop a pawn, though? Because if I take with the bishop, he takes on g5. I can take an h7 and then just pick up a pawn. And otherwise, if bishop takes and d takes, I take with my knight, and I'm defending the bishop on g5 twice with both my knights. So I actually think his last move just blunders a pawn. If I take on e7 first, he can take with his queen and reinforce this knight. So, yeah, I think this is just a pawn blunder. Yeah, he takes, and I will take. Unless he has something up his sleeve I don't see, but I would seriously doubt it. Knight e4 is not a bad plan, but it needs more preparation than what he just gave. Yeah, clearly he miscalculated because now he's starting to think. I think he might have actually offered an abort. Oh, I didn't see it, but he offered an abort like right at the beginning of the game. People have been doing that to me on occasion. I think a lot of them just don't like playing high-rated opponents in the pool. They'd prefer to play someone lower-rated. But f6. Okay, so I'll withdraw my bishop probably to f4. I could play bishop h4. I could also check him, but I don't think there's any reason to check him. It would just force his king to go to the corner, which he probably wants to do anyways. See, I think just bishop f4 here is fine. I would expect him to go knight b6 or knight f8 in a bid to get his light square bishop out. Now, my first instinct said, be wary of bishop f5, pinning your knight to the queen. But if he were to play bishop f5, I have knight takes f6 check as a discovery, so it's actually like not that big of a threat. Maybe I can go h3 first, which stops bishop g4. That might not be bad. I could also play knight c3 if I'm concerned about his knight going to d5. I kind of like the look of knight g3 too, but he has g5 and my bishop is lacking squares. So candidate moves here are h3, knight c3, maybe a move like rook fd1. Knight c5 is a candidate. Actually, knight c5 looks pretty good. Knight c5 would tie this bishop down. It couldn't move because the knight would take the pawn on b7. So if knight c5, knight d5, I can just withdraw my bishop, bishop g3. That looks all right. Let's do that. I think this move is fine. So knight d5, I'll move the bishop back. So I don't want to trade off my dark square bishop for his knight. That would wreck my pawns, and I'd like to keep a bishop. I bet he plays b6 now. And then I can move my knight. Kind of remains to be seen where is the best square. I was thinking d3. Looks like a useful square. b6, knight d3. I wonder if he has bishop f5 then. Pinning me because I no longer have a discovered attack trick. But that shouldn't be that big of a deal. If knight d3, bishop f5, I could play knight h4. If bishop e4, actually bishop e4 is slightly annoying. Maybe knight d3, bishop f5, queen b3 or c4. One of those two squares. Yeah, this is fine. Let's do this. Bishop f5 is like pseudo-active. Actually, on bishop f5, rook e1, I bet is a pretty good move too. He's pinning that way. But that way is easier for me to deal with because I can go like rook fd1, let's say. And I'm getting out of the skewer of the knight on the rook or the pin. Yeah, let's just play rook fd1. His pawn on c6 is hanging, so rook c8 might be played. Here I could try queen a4, attacking his bishop. e4 is also good, I'm sure. e4 would force his knight back to c7. Then could I take this pawn? Because if e4, knight b4, I take, he takes with his bishop, and I have queen b3 check. So e4, knight c7, queen takes c6. I'm gobbling another pawn. I don't think my queen gets trapped or anything. So I can get away with that, it looks like. At the very least, I can reassess after knight c7 and just check and make sure. But I'm fairly certain I can take on c6 with no negative repercussions. The only other move he can play here is bishop takes d3. But I'll just play queen takes d3 against that. That might be his best move, actually, because, yeah, he doesn't lose a pawn this way. If I play rook takes d3, knight b4, queen check, king h8, sure that's also pretty decent, but somehow queen takes d3 seems better. Yeah, let's just do queen takes d3. Then I'll bring this other rook over to c1 soon. If knight b4, I can give a check on c4. He moves his king, and then I play a3. I'm nearly trapping his knight, but he has b5. Still, the position is awesome for me. I've had a few games in this line where my opponents have just blundered pawns right off the bat. Here I can play queen c4 check and pick up that c6 pawn again. Yeah, and his knight can't move anywhere. Devastating after that.
Check.
So fork on the king and the pawn. If I take, knight a6 is the only way he can do an effective discovery. But I have so many squares I can go to. So let's just take this guy. Yep, knight a6, and now queen b7, queen b5, queen a4. All those are strong candidates. Slightly leaning towards queen a4 right now. Attacking the knight, x-raying the pawn. He has to move the knight, so let's say queen a4, knight b4, maybe a3. Knight's running out of squares. Once again, knight c2, I have rook c1. This looks pretty good. Let's do it. I wonder if he can go knight b4, a3, and then if rook a c1, I wonder if he can actually play knight takes d4. I thought for a second might work, but I have queen takes d4. If I were to take with like the rook, he could take on c1, but yeah, it's kind of a moot point. Knight b4, a3, knight c2, rook a c1, knight takes d4, queen takes d4. And d4 is guarded by both my rook and my knight. So if he captures on like c1 or something, or takes on d4 first, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so after knight b4, a3, knight c6, he'd have to play. And then I can play d5, I was thinking. Attacking his knight. Also threatening d6. Yeah, we'd be winning more material in that case. From the looks of it. Time-wise, we're doing well. A little less time than him, but we've played plenty of moves. He actually just disconnected and forfeited. So, I don't know if he meant to do that or what, but yeah, but okay, so to take this a little further, knight b4, I was going to play a3, and if the knight comes into c2, this move, and his knight is lacking retreat squares, he cannot play queen c7 because my bishop is guarding, and this move just fails to this. And then if take, I can just take with the knight and keep this rook defending the other rook. So I was thinking after a3, he would put the knight back on c6, and then I can go d5. And if a move like knight b8, d6 is coming. Bishop moves, and then d7, forking the two rooks, winning a piece. And actually, even after this, he gets his queen trapped. Guess he might have b5 technically, but... So let's review this from the beginning. Not a promising start for him in this opening. I've said this before on videos, but I think if you're going to play this line, you should learn bishop e7. If anything, just to give yourself options, but bishop e7 avoids this exchange variation. White can take, but they can't play bishop g5. They would have to settle for bishop f4 if they want to exchange on d5. Because this line is just really nice to play for white. So bishop g5, knight bd7. So the trap I was referring to is knight takes d5. Looks like it wins a pawn at first, but in fact it's a double question mark move. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d8. White's happy because they win a queen, but bishop b4 Check. Brings them back to reality very quickly. White has to block with the queen, and then Check. Take. Black has won a piece for a pawn. I actually saw this on board 1 of nationals one year. I think when I was in, I want to say 7th grade maybe. 7th grade, grade level nationals. And this happened on board 1 in the final round. And the player playing white just had basically lost the game before it had even started. He was playing for the national championship. So don't fall for that trap. Knight bd7, the nice thing about it, it's not a bad move. I mean, it fits with black's setup in this line. So you can play it and give your opponent an option to fall into the trap. Most people do know about this trap, though, in my experience from the white side. So e3, bishop e7, bishop d3, castle, queen c2. So I haven't committed this knight yet. I'm not letting him know whether I'm going to play knight e2 or knight f3. So he puts the pawn on c6, but I mentioned that this is not the only plan. Like, there are some people who play for c5 in this case. It's just that a lot of times isolated pawn positions result. White can play knight ge2 or knight f3 in this position. I usually play knight f3, but I saw knight ge2 recommended in this position a while back, I believe. White could also take if they wanted to give black an isolated pawn right now. Let's say knight f3 is played in this position and black does play c4. I think I had mentioned when I was explaining this move order that white might not want to allow this, but this early, c4 is probably not a good idea for black. I think just bishop f5. And sometimes black even has trouble defending the d5 pawn. Like if this knight moves, for instance, white can like take here, and then if bishop takes back, take on h7. So black has some trouble like keeping their structure together. c4 is usually better served in the middle game. Black is better served playing that in the middle game. So they might want to play like bishop b6, bishop b7, rook c8, and then look for c4 later. But white might even capture on c5 in the meantime. So it is possible to play like that. They played c6 though, and I played knight f3. It's nice that white has two plans at their disposal. So knight ge2 is played just as frequently as knight f3, but the plans that result are different. So let's say knight ge2 is played, black goes rook e8, castles, knight f8, standard way of continuing. Here white traditionally plays f3 and prepares play in the center with e4. That's one of the major lines. This is one of the major advantages of white's move order, of delaying the development of the kingside knight for so long. But I was in the mood to play more classically with knight f3. And he went rook e8, I castled, and he played this bad move, knight e4. Let's say he had played knight f8 instead. Here's where white can begin preparing the minority attack. And a minority attack is simply using less pawns to attack more pawns. So if we look at the queen side, white has the A and B pawns versus the A, B, and C. And you would think, with white having less pawns there, they wouldn't want to play on the queen side. But that's not the case. By playing rook A, B1, white can prepare to play B4 and then B5, and try to create a weakness, puncture a hole in black's pawn structure. Otherwise, this is pretty much an unshakable structure. And there's a whole host of lines. Sometimes white can even combine plans. So sometimes white will play for a minority attack and also play in a more central fashion. Here, e4 is like not as desirable because when black takes, you cannot take with a pawn. That's why having the pawn on f3 in that other line where the knight goes to e2 is nice, because you can take back with a pawn on e4. So white's not thrilled about e4, but a lot of times there's variations, not necessarily here, but let's say theoretically white did play knight e5, and white could follow with f4 and try to prop up the knight. That's one advantage of having the knight on f3 instead of back on e2 where it's a little more passive. So I think both knight ge2 and knight f3 are interesting and lead to an advantage for white. So you can kind of pick and choose and try either one, see which one you like. Knight ge2 is more enterprising. Knight f3, I'd say, plays more for an advantage without taking as many risks. So here he played the knight e4 move. And let's turn on the engine starting now. Yep, I took. So he's looking to exchange a few pieces and kind of reduce the pressure on his position, but he just went about it in the wrong way. Knight e4 has to be prepared. I would play knight f8 personally for black. I think this is definitely the best move. He'll have trouble with the light square bishop, but that's not uncommon for this line. So knight e4, and I do win a pawn. I take. If he had captured on g5, I would have taken
check
on h7, king h8, and probably withdrawn this bishop, bishop d3, or maybe bishop f5. Probably bishop f5, actually, as the computer indicates. But instead, he took on e4, and I took back. So I'm up a pawn. He does have the advantage of the two bishops, but the pawn is well worth the trouble of not having the bishop pair. I think bishop f4 is fine. The computer slightly prefers, or at least it did for a second, bishop h4. So here, knight b6. I was debating for a second what to play here. I actually spent almost a minute and a half on this move. I think I chose the right move, though. Knight c5 makes it harder for him to develop and attacks the b7 pawn. I was thinking about more subtle stuff like h3, trying to get him to go bishop f5 so I can do this discovery and then pick up his bishop. And I've won another pawn. But that's just a little bit of hope chess right there. So knight c5 is objectively a better move. Knight d5, I preserve my bishop. He goes b6, I go knight d3. So I was expecting bishop f5 in this position, which rules out queen takes c6 for the same reason that bishop a6 did. You could just take this knight. I think I would have played, I was thinking about rook fe1 actually in this position, trying to go for e4. If knight b4, can't I just play check?
Check.
Computer seems to think that this is not bad for black.
Check.
Take, c takes. Yeah, white remains up a pawn. One thing white would like to avoid is a transition into an opposite color bishop position. I guess it's less likely here, but if somehow black were able to trade this dark square bishop for this knight, then black's chances of drawing the game do go up. So that's one thing I might have to avoid. Bishop f5 should be tried, though. I think that gives me more trouble than bishop a6. So he did play bishop a6, and then I get rook fd1, and I'm out of the pin. I guess e4, the immediate e4 is also good. What happens if that? e4, because if knight here, I can probably go check first or take first on b4. Yeah, and I win 2 minor pieces. I guess here I even have more than that. But I'll win at the very least 2 minor pieces for the rook. So say something like bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, bishop takes f1, rook takes f1. He does get this e4 pawn, but this is a big advantage for white. I'm happy with rook fd1, though. I think this move is perfectly coherent. And I'm keeping open the option of e4. I'm also renewing the threat of taking on c6. So he goes rook c8 to guard that, e4. And he has coordination problems with his minor pieces. If knight c7, I was going to swipe this pawn. Oh, bishop b5. Yeah, I didn't notice bishop b5, but I can just go back, right? Queen c2 if necessary. Maybe he's getting a little play against my d4 pawn, because queen b3 can be met by bishop c4. Okay, so maybe I should have seen bishop b5, because if he had played knight c7, I was ready to take that pawn. But take bishop b5 would have been maybe a slightly unpleasant surprise. Queen b7 can be played here, and I'm still doing awesome, because he can't attack me with his rook due to queen takes c7, supported by the bishop on g3. But he took on d3, which makes his position even worse. I take with the queen. He still has problems with the knight. Knight back to c7. If knight b4, I was going to play queen c4 check.
Check.
Let's see how that works out. Here, and then a3. Almost traps the knight. He does have this b5 move. Yeah, I guess I can come in somewhere. Let's say queen f7, knight a6. Looks like a great position for white still. Maybe b4. Or rook c1. Just attack the pawn on c6. Yeah, this is winning. Queen b3 check, also good. So I take with the queen. He goes knight c7.
Check.
I give a check on c4, and another pawn drops off. Take. Knight a6, queen a4. Yep. And very likely he'd lose the a7 pawn if he continued. So he did this and then resigned or disconnected. Yeah, and I was intending this, knight here, and then d5. If he plays knight e5, I was wondering if I could even play d6 still, but I guess he can take this bishop, can't he? Yeah, so I probably would have settled for like a double capture on e5, and now I'm up, what, 3 pawns? 3 pawns to the good, and I'm threatening knight here, or maybe get my knight into c6. It's just a matter of time, and white playing relatively safely and not blundering. Okay, so yeah, I mean, time usage-wise, pretty good on our end, I think. I mean, when black quit the game, he had used less than 5 of his minutes. So, again, it's just, you've seen this now 2 games in a row. The Vishwa game, last time my opponent also lost a pawn in the opening. It's just a lot of these opponents I'm getting in this rating range, let's say like 1,600 to 2,000, they're just shooting themselves in the foot so early. They just give up a pawn just because they play a very, I don't know, ill-conceived move, and they just give up a pawn for nothing, and they've already nearly sealed their fate for the rest of the game. So you want to be able to capitalize on that. So thank you guys for watching this video against Bommel, and I will be back tomorrow with another standard video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.